We do know it's not redacted, that the FBI had already interviewed Carter Page, and they refer to their interviews. They don't tell us what happened in those interviews. And they also refer to this 2013 Russian spy ring, in which there was a case in the Southern District of New York in which Russian spies had tried to recruit Carter Page. One of them was picked up on a wiretap saying that Carter Page's enthusiasm works for me, and Carter Page has admitted that he passed documents to them. That's also a part of this FISA application, and reason as to why you would think the FBI would be quite concerned.
James, do you think the FBI acted appropriately?
Sure, and I've always ascribed to the old adage from Arthur C. Clarke, who said, never attribute to malevolence what is merely due to incompetence. And I went through the 400 pages that were dumped, and I took a look and scrutinized it as closely as I could, because remember, a lot of this is redacted, so you're basically trying to fill in the blanks. Now, having seen FISA applications before, I'm familiar with what they look like. What struck me about this one, for a FISA application to go through, it's not a standard of probable cause. To eavesdrop on Americans, you've got to be able to at least have a suspicion that they're acting as an agent of a foreign power. Now, the thing that a lot of people struggle with, including retired FBI agents, is was the usage of unverified political opposition research the main crux of this? And when you look at the interview that Mike Lisikoff from Yahoo News that he had with Christopher Steele, and you look at that being a big part of what the background was, the information that was used for this, that's what people struggle with. I don't necessarily.
But hold on there, James, because that's what Nunes pointed out in his memo. But when I looked at the actual warrant itself, it looked like it was mischaracterized in the Nunes memo, because it falls under the more general category of Carter Page denying some of the reports, and they point to some quotes within that Yahoo News article that back up the Carter Page denial. They're not using that, is my understanding, based on reading the document itself, the application, what was not redacted. It doesn't look to me like they're actually that it's included in that application as sort of a backup to their evidence.
There were 3 renewals for this thing, so 4 judges took a look at this. I'm not going to question that. My job really is to call law enforcement balls and strikes. I get it, the political noise on both ends of the spectrum, and I watched Carter Page this morning with Jake Tapper on State of the Union. He came across, this is a United States Naval Academy graduate and an academic, and he came across kind of as unwitting and possibly duped. He claims that he was offered no compromising material. Now, he thinks the basis behind this application was specious. He can make that argument. As I look at it, was it the finest piece of a Title III application or a FISA application, the finest piece of work I've ever seen? Absolutely not. Not in precision of language. And I'm sorry, when a huge portion of it is based on opposition research, and I know the Washington Free Beacon started it, then the Democratic National Committee took over, but when it starts out as opposition research, I can't imagine how that got through without more red flags and more substantiated verification.
But you point out, James, that there are multiple layers to approve these FISA applications, these FISA warrants through the application process. And when we look at what is laid out there, it was 4 Republican-appointed judges who had to sign off ultimately and allow it to go through. So you think they overlooked what you believe is a flawed application?
No, absolutely not. And here's what I'll go back to. I am not a proponent of the tinfoil hat crowd, as they're called, that believe in a deep state. I don't believe in that. I think that much more often when we have things like this that turn up, it's less a conspiracy, it's less malevolence, and more so based on just mistakes. There were a number of agents that worked on these applications and a number of level of sign-offs. There's levels of redundancies in the Department of Justice. And to your point, Anna, there were 4 separate judges, and let's take their political parties out of it, but 4 separate judges. I have no problem with that. I'm just struck by the fact that political opposition research could have been, if not the sole foundation of it, a huge piece of what that FISA application was based upon.
Ryan, what are your thoughts on what we just heard from James?
So first, he can't really, none of us can say what else it was based on because that's redacted. There are lots of pages that are just blacked out. So there's independent information that they had in addition to the Christopher Steele document and information from Christopher Steele. So for him to even give us the proportion, nobody can say that. And secondly, we don't even just have 4 separate judges approving it, but they're approving it over time, each time at 90-day intervals. And you would presume that they're doing that on the basis that the wiretap's actually producing valuable information. So they must be getting valuable information from Carter Page. And then just as you said, the only reason that they use the Michael Isikoff news report is just to pinpoint that Carter Page is making denials, and some of these denials are false. He tells Judy Woodruff in February of 2017 that he had no meetings with Russian officials in 2016. He has testified before the House Intelligence Committee that he had a private meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister of Russia, and that he has met other Russian officials. He admits now that he met the Russian ambassador. He admits that he met the Russian Deputy Prime Minister in July on his Moscow trip as well as his December trip. That's information that the FBI would be providing these judges, in addition to the information they're getting from the wiretaps, and then these strange categorical denials, false denials. They would want to know, what is he hiding? And I think it is only appropriate for them to then investigate him and keep the wiretap going, as long as they think it's useful and the judges think it's useful.
Ryan, James, thank you both. As always, we appreciate your expertise here. A revealing quote from President Trump's Supreme Court nominee about President Nixon and the Watergate tapes. Could it foreshadow what he thinks now about the current investigation led by Robert Mueller? You're live in the CNN. He made in 1999 about the Nixon Watergate tapes, saying the Supreme Court decision, a unanimous decision that required Nixon to turn over those tapes, may have been wrongly decided. Here is the full quote from Brett Kavanaugh, which came during a legal roundtable interview. Again, this was in 1999. He said, quote, "But maybe Nixon was wrongly decided. Hearsay, though it is to say so. Nixon took away the power of the president to control information in the executive branch by holding that the courts had power and jurisdiction to order the president to disclose information in response to a subpoena sought by a subordinate executive branch official." I want to bring in CNN legal analyst and former Watergate prosecutor Richard Benveniste. So, Richard, what do you make of this comment from Kavanaugh?
Well, it could show why President Trump likes the cut of his jib. He's a person who may someday face the same kind of dilemma. When the Supreme Court declared in U.S. v. Nixon that no man is above the law, maybe Mr. Trump feels otherwise.
Now, Kavanaugh did make a more recent comment in 2015 during a speech in which he appeared to have changed his position. What questions would you have for him if you were to question him as he goes through the confirmation process?
Oh, whether, in fact, he believes that a special counsel duly appointed and provided with the authority of the Attorney General under the restrictions that he has the authority to seek evidence wherever he can find it, and to assure the American public of a full, fair, and open investigation.
How do you get somebody like him not to evade a question or sidestep him?
That's always been very difficult in the context of Supreme Court nominees, where the opposing party does not control the committees that do the questioning.
So we'll see. We'll see. I want to move on because there's another Nixon parallel we learned about this week. We learned the FBI has a recording between President Trump and his former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, in which the two men, prior to the 2016 actual election, discuss a payment to a former Playboy model, Karen McDougal, who has alleged to have had an affair with then private citizen Trump. Do you see those tapes as significant?
Well, now we check the box of tapes where the analogies to Watergate are just stunning. There's so many, and here's another one. Yes, in connection with an investigation as to whether the catch and release deal made by Mr. Trump's good friend, Mr. Pecker, was part of an attempt to influence the election. That's a legitimate question, and whether these tapes show that Mr. Trump once again has been very casual with the truth. In fact, where he denied any knowledge of the payment, according to what's been reported, these tapes would put the lie to that.
Let's talk about Paul Manafort for a minute, because his trial starts this week on Wednesday in Virginia. He's facing charges of money laundering, tax fraud, other crimes. What will you be watching for?
Well, this is the first time that Mr. Mueller's team goes to court in a trial, and it will be quite interesting. The charges are several. Mr. Manafort's former partner, Rick Gates, will be a principal witness against Mr. Manafort. The charges are very significant, over $20 million in tax evasion, money laundering. There'll be evidence about extraordinary purchases by Mr. Manafort, a lifestyle where he was buying suits costing $15,000 a piece, I'm told.
A lot of people will say, but what does this have to do with the initial root of the Mueller probe?
Well, of course, this is a person who became campaign manager for Mr. Trump's campaign, and a person who was present at the significant meeting at Trump Tower in which